10,000 tool changes. I've been counting. And in the 100+ hours of torture testing the 8-tool Prusa Core ONE INDX Founders Edition, it hasn't missed once. Not once. And considering this is bleeding edge, first of its kind technology, that's pretty damn impressive. Which makes it all the more maddening that there's one thing, just one, that I really need Prusa to fix before this goes on sale to all of you. Let's get after it. Before we get after it, though, let's do the boring ethical disclosures. Here they are. But two of these are more important than the rest, namely these two. Because this machine is a Founders Edition and a one-of-one fully assembled example at that, this is in no way reflective of the final edition that the public will be able to purchase in the coming months. I wonder why I was the only reviewer to get a fully assembled version. The persuasion tool.
I broke another screw in the god.
Oh man, did I just knock the power out? No. As I mentioned.
Sorry, Prusa, I just broke the spool holder.
Oh, right. In any case, Prusa and I have agreed that I will do my absolute best to reserve my judgment and conclusions for the final production version because, you know, I'm super good at keeping my opinions to myself. But to their credit, I am completely free to give my improvement suggestions, which I will do later on in the video, liberally. So with all of that out of the way, what were my first impressions? Well, as I unboxed and set up the printer, I couldn't help but think to myself, this machine is undoubtedly, unapologetically, and unmistakably a Prusa. Now that may sound silly in hindsight, but I'll remind you that this is the furthest that Prusa has ever ventured into the worlds of collaboration and co-development. Heck, they've even gone so far as to put someone else's logo on the tool head, which certainly feels like Terra Nova for such an iconic brand. So, like an automotive blogger driving the first model after a big merger, I couldn't help but wonder how this big partnership with BondTech would affect the look, feel, and experience of the product. Well, perhaps it's because both companies share a similar ethos, but I can safely say that they've lost none of the Prusiness. Prusacity? Whatsoever. Take, for example, the liberal use of 3D printed parts, now both FDM and SLS, on powder-coated sheet metal. Or the relentless devotion to providing an upgrade path to existing customers, and finding clever solutions to work around existing constraints. And of course, the unwavering focus on reliability, durability, and print quality above all else, including sometimes user convenience. The one conclusion I will allow myself to draw based on the Founders Edition is this. The Prusa Core ONE INDX is a Prusa through and through. And if that's something that resonates with you, then you're gonna love the Index. But with that said, even though I'd seen the Index up close and personal at trade shows, there were still a number of things that really surprised me. So in no particular order, let's talk about the surprises now that it's in our hands. Right out of the gate, perhaps the biggest surprise was the heating speed. Now, I don't know what I was expecting, given that I have induction stovetops at home, but it wasn't this. This thing heats up unbelievably fast, like count the seconds on one hand fast. This must be how they've been able to boast time savings over even traditional tool changers, but it's not the only massive benefit that comes from the move to induction. More on that in a second though, because the second surprise for me had to do with nozzle alignment. Now at this point, I've tested and reviewed quite a few tool changers, and every time, nozzle alignment requires the user to do something at setup. Install a special pin, remove the build plate, clean the nozzles, but not with Index. See, Index actually does this fully automatically before every single print, using an eddy current sensor on the corner of the bed. And it does all of it in less time than it would take many printers to do a bed mesh. Pretty cutting edge stuff, I'd say. And given that this is cutting edge tech, you'd be forgiven for questioning how reliable it really is. Which leads us to the next surprise, which is the tool swap reliability. Unboxing and installing the Index nozzles, I had a kind of shocking realization. These things are only held onto the dock by some mating parts and a pair of magnets. And given that my friends and I spent the better part of the last 2 years tweaking a tool changer docking system that relied on magnets, let's just say that I had my doubts. But on that front, I've been pleasantly surprised. I've done, at this point, I think over 10,000 tool changes, and the Index hasn't missed once. Besides the times that I knocked the tools off the dock by shoving hands, lights, and cameras into the build volume. Why was I shoving lights and cameras into the build volume of a brand new cutting-edge 3D printer? Well, that leads me to the fourth surprise, which is visibility. Prusa has done a really nice job, at least on the Founders Edition, of upgrading the entire experience to have a beautiful, powder-coated steel bracket that holds the tools up. It's really slick, it's very sturdy, and it shouldn't creep over time when exposed to heat. The only downside of this is, of course, visibility. If you're a content creator hoping to get shots of the printer in action, forget about it. But also, as a user, unless you're printing PLA or PETG with the top open, you're gonna need to kind of do this dance to check whether filament is loaded, how the first layer is looking, or how full the purge bucket is. And more on that in a second. Now, this isn't a complaint. After all, it's not actually that important to see your print, but I would strongly recommend anyone upgrading to the Index to also pick up the Core One Buddy camera if you don't have it already. Also, I did just receive an update that this is actually already improved on the Prusa edition. Nice. If you found yourself cocking your head to the side when I said the words purge bucket, I don't blame you. After all, one of the biggest questions that people have when it comes to tool changers is, wait a second, why do I need to purge or print a prime tower if each material has its own nozzle? And historically, the answer to this question has been threefold. 1, oozing. 2, to build up pressure in the nozzle and get the material flowing. And 3, material degradation caused by sitting in a hot nozzle that spent minutes heating up and cooling down between layers. But for all the challenges and constraints that Index had to contend with, again, more on that later, here it seems to offer a significant and unexpected benefit. See, if heating up and cooling down each just take a handful of seconds, then you don't really need to worry about oozing or material degradation. You just need to get things flowing and then get back to printing. First of all, this saves a ton of material. These tiny little purge peas themselves are absolutely minuscule, yes, but also in instances where there are no color changes on a layer or group of layers, you don't need to waste filament or time building up a prime tower. The filament savings, as you can see, are pretty staggering. This isn't a perfectly fair comparison because I printed the prime tower version with adaptive layer heights and the purge bucket version without. But I mean, even if you add, say, 20% to the purge P amount, there's still no comparison. Prusa themselves have actually measured the difference across multiple printers printing the exact same model, and it's nothing short of revolutionary. I mean, do you guys remember where multicolor printing was like 2 years ago? But there are, of course, some trade-offs to doing it this way. As I alluded to before, the tools, or in this case, the nozzles, are incredibly simple. I might even call them dumb. Obviously, there's no gears, heater, or fan. That's kind of the whole selling point. But there also isn't even so much as a toolhead filament sensor or a thermistor. The Index senses temperature using infrared, obviating the need for complicated wireless communication protocols that are gonna jack up the cost of replacement nozzles. Now, that much wasn't really a surprise, but what was a surprise was one of the major consequences of this simplicity. I'm calling it the pull-out problem. Allow me to explain. On a normal 3D printer or tool changer, each strand of filament is held in place by extruder gears. That way, if you, say, bump the filament or move the spool into a dryer mid-print and pull on it just a little bit, it stays in place. Yeah, it turns out not with the Index. Index, the filament is held in place by essentially gluing itself to the inside of the nozzle as it cools down. And this works okay during normal operation with, the recommended accessories. But it won't work if, say, you use an external dryer with a long and heavy PTFE tube weighing on the filament, or if you accidentally bump one of the strands of filament while loading another spool. Because, side note, a silver lining of this little quirk is that you can essentially tug on even a cold nozzle to load and unload filaments mid-print without pausing the printer and without it even noticing or freaking out. And since you have 8 nozzles, you're bound to have some that aren't used in every single print. And I personally found this little feature to be very convenient for just preparing the printer for the next print before the current one even finished. Again, this isn't going to be an issue if you never apply pressure to the filament during printing, but I still feel like it is an oversight that should be resolved in the Prusa edition. And here's why. The toolhead itself, as I said, doesn't actually have filament detection sensors, which means that it can't detect when the filament is yoinked out or broken past the side filament sensor, which I feel like is bound to happen when people print the types of brittle carbon fiber reinforced filaments that INDX is fully capable of. And when that does inevitably happen, it will ultimately lead to completely preventable print failures. Ask me how I know. And finally, our last surprise, which is that the silicone wipers and the pellet former and just the positioning of the purge bucket as a whole are all extremely important. How important? Well, just for giggles, here's what a print looks like without those wipers and without a prime tower. And here's what your prints will look like if the height of the assembly isn't perfectly calibrated. Fortunately, the printer does have an auto calibration tool built in, and that's probably a very good thing because every time you remove the purge bin to empty it, you do run the risk of inadvertently adjusting the height. And that can cause stringing, blobbing, and just horrific looking prints to appear seemingly out of nowhere. Not to worry though, because if you want to avoid this whole hornet's nest altogether, with one click you can just enable a prime tower, at least until things like profiles and calibration tools are tightened up. And your prints should turn out pretty much perfect every single time. Why is this whole silicone nozzle thing surprising though? Well, perhaps it's because Prusa has, for whatever reason, somewhat stubbornly avoided using silicone nozzle wipers on any of their printers up until now, leading many users to design and install their own version. But I suppose in order to achieve the much more important goal of reducing purge waste, they've had to see the light, and they've decided to finally add them. But beyond that, it does surprise me that such a crucial part of the printer's performance and print quality comes down to such a small knob that can be so easily knocked out of alignment. So I'd really like to see Prusa add some notches to that knob or something in the next version, just to prevent it from being moved inadvertently. But that's already getting into improvement suggestions, so let's move on to the next section. Because one of the things that makes Prusa machines so popular, especially among engineers, is their commitment to open source. In fact, later on, I'm going to be sharing some more ideas that I have for improving this printer, and wouldn't you know it, when I went online to Printables, I was very pleased to see that all of the parts for the index are already uploaded and available to use as reference geometry. Plus, if you're a designer or engineer, with the new open community license, Prusa actually allows you to sell your own upgrades to their machines on Printables or anywhere else, which I think is pretty darn cool. Personally, I'm already at work collaborating with some of my designer and manufacturer connections to create some awesome upgrades that I think will take INDX to the next level. And it's all possible thanks to this video's sponsor, Onshape. First of all, Onshape not only allows you to import step files, but it can even work with mesh STL files like the ones that Prusa provides for reference. Plus, because Onshape is fully cloud-based, multiple people on different continents can work on that same design at once without having to worry about version control or destructive changes. It's all automatically stored in the history, and you can branch or revert it at any time. Plus, I really love how Onshape has a huge library of public designs already available to import into my own designs, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel every time I want to work on a design for a specific kind of motor, or even an entire 3D printer. I've been using and recommending Onshape for years because it really is the only CAD suite that I actually enjoy working with. So if you're an engineer, make sure to hit the link in the description or scan the QR code appearing on screen now to get up to 6 months of their professional plan free. Thanks again to Onshape. Now, back to the video. Now, before we get into my wish list and improvement ideas, I know you guys will absolutely eat me alive in the comments section if I don't show you some sample prints, so here they are. I know that I always make excuses for print quality in these videos, but in this case, I'm not going to. I'm just gonna state the facts. Prusa is still working on both filament and print profiles, so all of these prints were printed in 100% PLA on a 0.4mm nozzle using the default unmodified generic PLA profiles. But I also freely mixed and matched PLA Pro, high-speed PLA, matte PLA, and even HT PLA without changing anything in the default profiles. I did dry most of the filaments where I noticed that it was necessary, but some of these prints were done with my own makeshift solution for the nozzle wiper and pellet former while I waited for the official one to become available. So that's a good segue into my wish list, because let's face it, this is Prusa. They've literally built their entire brand around using 3D printed parts so that they can constantly improve their printers after the sale, and then publishing the files for free so that you and I can upgrade our printers at home as well. Not to mention, they do lead the industry when it comes to releasing software updates that add new functionality to much older models. Thus, I hope you guys don't perceive this as a laundry list of the Index's shortcomings, but rather me shooting my shot at the very realistic possibility that my wish list will get fulfilled in the Prusa edition, to the benefit of everyone else. The first item on my list is one that I've been harping on Prusa for years: auto filament calibration built into the printer. This is something that was actually teased as a feature back during the launch of the XL and the Nextruder, and it's only become more important as the selection of filament types has become so much more diverse. So Prusa, please, let's finally make it happen with Index, because it's going to be an absolute pain in the neck if a user has to walk over to the printer, double check which exact brand of PLA, high-speed PLA, matte PLA, or PLA Pro is loaded into each one of the 8 slots, and then select the correct profile in the slicer every single time. Editing Jonathan here. Get used to me, we'll be seeing a lot of each other in this video. So since recording, I have been nagging multiple contacts at Prusa about this, and I was able to get a smirking answer from Tommy, who said on the record that, quote, "We have some major firmware updates coming to address the most common pain points customers are experiencing." Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. Wait, what? Walk over to the printer? Why would you need to do that, you might ask? And that's my second major wish list item: filament mapping and matching in both the printer and the slicer. Unfortunately, as of right now, the Core ONE Index only knows what type of filament is loaded into each slot. It doesn't actually know the color, nor does Prusa Slicer or Prusa Connect or EasyPrint. It might sound like a small inconvenience, but this effectively means that you cannot start a print remotely unless you somehow memorize or write down all 8 filaments and their respective positions. And even when you do walk over physically, you'll need to check each filament visually on the sides of the printer and then map it to the correct filament in the G-code, especially if you downloaded a pre-painted model and didn't load the filament in the exact same order as in the 3MF. All in all, this little mapping dance can take between 20 and 30 clicks for something that is done automatically by many other tool changer software stacks. Now, I'm not sure if this is a limitation of Prusa's firmware, their chip architecture, or something that's maybe patented by another company, but every other brand on the market is already doing this. It's considered standard even on 4-color setups. So I really hope that the final software and firmware are going to add it to Index, because with 8 colors, it is genuinely annoying to have to walk over to the printer and manually remap them before every single print. In fact, if I could only get one of these wishlist items before the Prusa edition ships, it would be this, hands down. Another convenience that I'd really like to see between now and the general release is pre-feeders. No, it's not the end of the world to load and unload 8 filaments manually, but speaking from experience, it is just enough friction that it causes me to choose my Snapmaker U1 over my Prusa XL or my FlashForge Creator 5 almost every time. I will say that with such speedy heating and much more efficient macros, the Index is much faster to swap all filaments than the XL, but with 8 of them, it can still take like 5 minutes doing something that the printer could be doing all by itself. What's more, the pre-feeders could probably solve that pullout issue that I mentioned earlier. Now I get it, Prusa is manufacturing in Europe and they're trying to compete with China, so they don't want to add unnecessary costs to parts or manufacturing or introduce another component that could break in very demanding print farm environments. But I do have what I think is an interesting idea for combining some manual intervention with about $7 worth of parts to solve this issue once and for all. And while we're on the topic of inexpensive components that greatly improve quality of life, I would really like to see a toolhead filament sensor built into the final version. Perhaps it's just me because I do print a lot of old or recycled filament, but it's a pretty common occurrence to see filament break after the side filament sensor. And as I mentioned before, that can cause you to lose an entire print, which is a real shame when it's a 24-hour 8-color print. Now, I'm really not sure why the folks at BondTech couldn't just add a very small micro switch into the back of the tool head that would be depressed whenever filament is present. But even if that's not possible, I'd think that there would be a way to sense when the gears themselves aren't actually gripping filament, either by the absence of resistance or the position of the gears. Just a thought, and something that might be fixable in firmware. In fact, I have yet another idea for improvement, this one dependent wholly on software. So remember how I said that these little purge Ps are absolutely minuscule? Well, that got me thinking, do we even need them at all? I mean, sure, I know from experience that you do not want to extrude your outer layers using degraded, unprimed filament, but supports? Infill? Heck, maybe even the inner perimeters? With a purge amount this small, I have to believe that most layers would have enough of any of those just to purge the degraded filament there, rather than wasting precious seconds purging it over a silicone block. Perhaps this has more to do with the oozing than the actual purging, but I think it would be really cool if the slicer could identify which layers have significant amounts of either support or infill, and then just skip the prime P on those layers altogether. I have to imagine you could shave off like an hour or more from some of these very long 24-hour prints.
Hey, me again. I have since figured out that you can just enable infill before perimeters in Prusa Slicer, and that will dramatically improve the quality of your prints. So I do recommend that both Prusa and any of you with the Founders Edition units do that, at least until both the profiles and the silicone wiper adjustment protocol are fully dialed in.
I'd also love to see an alternative option to the purge bucket. Don't get me wrong.
Sorry, last time, I promise. Prusa did just release a blog post and a firmware update that both confirm an extended purge bucket solution is right around the corner. See what I mean about the very real possibility that they'll actually implement user suggestions?
In any case, while I promised not to turn this into a review, I do feel like I would be doing a genuine disservice to all of you if I didn't at least address the question that's probably on everyone's mind. Is the index either the Core One variant or any of the other variants for you? Or should you maybe wait until it's a little bit more refined before making the leap? Well, before I try to answer that, let me really quickly state the facts. As of right now, you cannot buy the Index upgrade kit even if you want to, though that will hopefully change by the end of July 2026. With that said, even when orders do open up for the Prusa edition, it'll be just that, a kit. The estimated labor time for upgrading sits somewhere between 7 and 12 hours, though I really do hope that they're working to optimize and improve that in the Prusa edition, for example, by allowing you to purchase a Core One without the tool head so you don't have to spend time disassembling it. What all this means is that right from the get-go, if you're not willing to install the system yourself, you are going to want to wait until fully assembled versions like mine become available to the public, hopefully by the end of the year. As far as the Founders Edition, I definitely can respect why Prusa asked me not to review it. On the one hand, despite being cutting-edge tech, the core architecture, things like the heating, the tool changes, and the alignment, it's all already very polished, smooth, and reliable. Within a day of it arriving, I trusted this machine enough to let it run overnight, doing multiple 14-hour, 1,000 tool change prints without AI failure detection and without thinking twice. So one could easily be fooled into thinking that this is the final product. And yet, it's very much not. It's a Founders Edition meant for early adopters. And there are a few big things that could easily change between now and the Prusa Edition, any of which would dramatically improve the convenience and the usability of the system and just make it much more suitable for a much wider audience. And again, because it's Prusa we're talking about, I actually believe that they might implement some of these changes between now and then, probably with a few printed parts and a firmware update. So in good conscience, I don't think that it would be fair to answer the "is this for you" question, at least not until I get my hands on the same version that all of you would. But hey, I'd love to know what all of you think down in the comments below. And make sure to give us a like and maybe join the 30% of viewers who are actually subscribed to the channel while you're at it. If this video does well, or if enough of you request it, I will consider revisiting Index for a proper review once the multi-material profiles and the Prusa edition become available. While we wait for that to happen though, it's probably a good time to start learning what you can actually do with a multi-material printer like this, from the routine applications to the cutting edge tech that's yet to be proven. We actually did a whole video all about that, which I think you're really gonna like. So I'll go ahead and link that one right here. That's all for this week, but I'll see all of you on the next layer.